Gia had always dreamed of her wedding day. She didn't want anything big or fancy, just something simple, beautiful, and full of love. She picked a soft, elegant dress, chose her favorite flowers, and smiled all morning, knowing she was about to marry the love of her life, Leo. Everything felt like a fairy tale, but just as the ceremony was about to start, her older sister Sana walked in, and everything changed. Sana wasn't just late, she was dressed in a long white sparkling gown that looked more like a bridal dress than a guest's outfit. Her makeup was bold, her heels were taller than Gia's, and her entrance made heads turn. The guests began whispering, confused and surprised. Some even thought Sana was the bride. Gia stood there, shocked, her heart sinking. Sana slowly walked over, smiling like nothing was wrong. Then she leaned close to Gia and whispered, "I look better than you." Just like that, Gia's joy was hit by a wave of sadness and embarrassment. Her own sister, on the most important day of her life, had come to steal the spotlight. But Gia didn't cry. She just stood quietly, holding her bouquet, trying to stay calm. Deep inside, old memories of Sana's jealousy came rushing back. She remembered all the times Sana had tried to outshine her, and now she was doing it again, right at her wedding. Still, Gia took a deep breath and smiled, because this was her day. And even though her sister tried to ruin it, something inside Gia told her the story was far from over. The room was filled with soft music, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Guests were smiling, enjoying the beautiful wedding of Gia and Leo. Everything seemed perfect, like a scene from a dream. Then came the moment for toasts. Everyone expected kind words, maybe a funny story, or warm wishes for the couple. But what happened next shocked the entire room. Sana, Gia's older sister, stood up and walked toward the microphone. People thought she was about to give a sweet speech as the bride's sister. But instead of a smile, she wore a proud smirk. She grabbed the mic quickly, without asking, and looked around the room with confidence. Everyone went quiet, waiting to hear what she had to say. Then, she dropped a bomb. "If anyone here thinks Leo should have been with someone else, speak now," she said, her voice loud and clear. The room went completely silent. You could hear a pin drop. Guests looked at each other in shock. Some gasped, others raised their eyebrows. Gia's eyes widened, her heart racing. What was Sana trying to do? Why would she say something like that on her sister's wedding day? Gia stood frozen. Her hands shook slightly, and her face went pale. She didn't know whether to cry or scream. All eyes were on Leo now. Was he going to say something? Was he going to walk away? Then, something unexpected happened. Leo stood up slowly from his seat. People held their breath. Gia felt like the ground beneath her was about to break. Her heart was pounding so hard, it hurt. Leo looked around the room, then walked toward the front. He gently took the mic from Sana, who looked very sure of herself, as if she was expecting him to agree with her. But Leo turned to face Gia, his voice calm but full of emotion. "Yes," he said. The room gasped again. Sana smiled smugly, thinking she had won, but Leo wasn't finished. "Yes, there is someone else I could have been with, but I thank God every day that I didn't choose them, because if I had, I would have missed the chance to love the most beautiful, kind, and strong woman I've ever met, Gia." Sana's smile disappeared. Her face fell completely. Leo continued, looking right into Gia's eyes. "I choose you, Gia. I will always choose you. No one else could ever take your place." The room burst into applause. Some guests wiped tears from their eyes. Gia covered her mouth in shock. Her heart, which had just been filled with fear, now overflowed with love. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Sana stood frozen, embarrassed, and lost for words. Her plan had failed. What was supposed to humiliate Gia only made her shine brighter. And just like that, the power Sana tried to take away from her sister was returned, stronger than ever. Everyone in that room saw who truly deserved the spotlight. And it wasn't the woman in the white sequined gown. It was the bride, Gia. As Gia stood there, staring at her sister Sana, holding back tears, so many memories came rushing into her mind like a flood. It wasn't just about today. No, this moment brought back a whole lifetime of pain. Moments she had buried deep in her heart, hoping they'd stay there forever. But now, on the most special day of her life, it was all coming back. She remembered her 10th birthday, She had been so excited. She wore her favorite pink dress, and her friends were singing and laughing. But then, Sana walked in wearing a glittery red outfit and loud heels. She danced in front of everyone, told jokes, and made the day all about her. Everyone forgot about the birthday girl. Gia just stood in the corner, holding her half-melted cake, pretending it didn't hurt. She remembered her first crush in high school, Michael. He was sweet, and he liked her too. They talked during lunch and walked home sometimes. Gia had never told anyone, but somehow Sana found out. A week later, Michael stopped talking to Gia. She saw him holding hands with Sana near the school gate. Sana had smiled at Gia like nothing happened. Gia said nothing. She always said nothing. There were so many moments like that. Times when Gia would win an award, but their parents would only talk about how Sana looked prettier that day. Times when Gia worked hard, but Sana would always get the praise, even if she did nothing. And the worst part, their mother always said, "Sana just needs more attention. You're the calm one, Gia. Let your sister shine. You'll have your moment." So Gia waited. She waited through birthdays, school events, family dinners, and holiday trips. She waited and waited for her moment. And now, her moment had finally come. She was marrying the love of her life, the one person who saw her worth, the one who chose her. But again, just like always, Sana had found a way to make it about herself, wearing a sparkling white dress, stealing the microphone, turning all eyes on her. It was happening all over again. Gia felt her hands tremble. Her heart was aching, not just from what Sana did today, but from everything that came before it. It felt like her entire life was playing in fast forward in her head. The jealousy, the games, the fake smiles, the way Sana always made her feel small. But this time, something inside Gia started to shift. She wasn't the quiet, shy girl anymore. She wasn't going to let her sister steal her joy again. Not today. Today was supposed to be her beginning, not another chapter in Sana's story. She had spent years shrinking herself, making space for her sister, letting others walk over her, but not anymore. She looked at Leo, standing strong beside her. He saw her, he chose her, and that gave her strength. No matter what Sana had done in the past, Gia knew deep down this day was hers, and for the first time in her life, she was ready to fight for her light. She was ready to finally shine. As everyone in the wedding hall sat in shock from Sana's bold words, something even more surprising happened. Leo, the groom, suddenly stood up and walked out. No one knew what was happening. People looked at each other, confused. Some guests began whispering, "Did he leave her? Is the wedding over? Did Sana ruin everything?" Gia stood frozen, her heart pounding so loud she could barely hear anything else. Her face turned pale. Her fingers felt cold. This couldn't be happening. Was Leo leaving her? Was he so upset that he just walked away? The love of her life, the one person she trusted, had just left without a word, and right in front of everyone. She felt like the floor might open up and swallow her. Sana, on the other hand, had a smug little smile on her face. She tilted her head slightly, acting innocent, but the sparkle in her eyes said something else, like she had won. Like she had finally managed to ruin her sister's big day. She looked around, enjoying the confusion. She even smoothed out her white dress, as if she was preparing for more attention. Minutes passed, and it felt like hours. Gia's aunt came to her and whispered, "Don't worry, maybe he just needed air." But even she didn't sound sure. The entire room was tense. The joy of the wedding had vanished. It was replaced by worry, doubt, and silent judgment. But then, after 15 long minutes, the doors opened. Everyone turned around, and there stood Leo, walking back in with someone beside him, an older woman. No one recognized her at first, but Gia's eyes widened. Her heart jumped, not with fear, but with surprise. It was Mrs. Kamari, a former neighbor from their childhood neighborhood. She had moved away years ago, and no one had heard from her since. But Gia knew exactly who she was. Mrs. Kamari had once lived next door and had seen many things during those years. She had always been kind to Gia, always offering kind words and support when things at home were rough. Sana's smirk quickly vanished the moment she saw the woman. Her eyes darted around, her face tightening. For the first time that day, Sana looked uncomfortable. Leo helped Mrs. Kamari to the front of the hall, right next to Gia. He held the microphone and said, "I didn't walk out to run away. I walked out to bring in the truth, Because love is not just about saying vows. It's about standing up for the one you love. Everyone went quiet. Leo turned to Mrs. Kamari and nodded. She slowly stepped forward and began speaking. Her voice was calm but powerful. She told the guests stories, real ones, from Gia and Sana's childhood. Stories of how Gia was always kind, always patient, always made to stay in the background. She spoke about how Sana used to bully her own sister, even when no one was watching. She shared the truth that had been hidden for so long. The room went silent. You could hear people gasping quietly. Sana stood stiff, her eyes wide, lips trembling. She tried to say something, but no words came out. Gia just stood there, shocked, overwhelmed, but slowly, her heart began to feel lighter. Leo took her hand and said softly, "I brought her here so they know the real you. You don't have to fight alone anymore." And in that moment, Gia realized this was her day, and no one, not even her sister, could take it away now. As everyone in the hall sat quietly, still stunned from what had just happened, Leo held Gia's hand and looked into her eyes. Then he slowly turned back to the crowd, took a deep breath and said, "There's something else I want to share." People leaned forward, curious. Some looked nervous. Sana's face was stiff, but her hands began to fidget. Something in her eyes said she knew what was coming, but she hoped it wouldn't. Leo reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, old notebook. It looked worn, with a faded pink cover and pages that had been folded many times. Gia's eyes widened the moment she saw it. It was her journal, her secret journal, the one she had kept hidden for years. It held her thoughts, her pain, her quiet tears, everything she had never said out loud. She had written in it during the hardest times of her life, especially when Sana had broken her heart again and again. Leo gently held up the journal and said, "I found this one day, tucked away in a drawer. I didn't plan to read it, but something told me I should understand what she's been through before walking into a lifetime with her." The hall went completely silent. Then he opened the journal and began to read. He read about how Gia had once fallen deeply in love with a kind man named Toby, how she had dreamed of being with him, how, for the first time, she had felt seen and special, and how her own sister Sana found out and purposely went after him, not because she liked him, but just to prove she could take him away. Leo's voice was calm, not angry. He wasn't reading to shame Sana. He was reading to show Gia's strength. "She wrote," Leo continued, "it hurt more than anything. Not because he left me, but because she knew how I felt and did it anyway. And everyone told me again to understand her nature, like my pain didn't matter." Some guests began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Others shook their heads in disbelief. A few women held their hands over their mouths. You could feel the emotions rise in the room like a wave. Leo closed the journal slowly and said, "She never told me these things. Not once. She never played victim. She never asked for pity. She kept smiling. She kept loving. She chose peace over revenge, even when it broke her inside." He looked back at Gia and smiled gently. "That's the woman I'm marrying today. A woman who has every reason to hate, but still chooses love." Tears ran down Gia's face. She had never imagined Leo knew so much. She had never wanted her pain to become public. But in that moment, it didn't feel like shame. It felt like freedom. Sana's face was pale now. Her confident smirk was gone. She looked around the room and saw the judgment in people's eyes. Not because Leo embarrassed her, but because the truth had finally come out. A truth she never thought would be spoken. Gia stood tall, still holding Leo's hand, and for the first time in her life her voice was heard. Her story was known. Her heart was seen. This time, no one was going to steal her moment. As Leo finished speaking and closed Gia's journal, the room remained quiet for a few seconds. It was the kind of silence that comes after something powerful, when everyone is too stunned to move or speak. Then, slowly, the whispers started. People in the crowd began looking at each other, shaking their heads. A few guests turned to stare at Sana, their expressions filled with shock and disappointment. Her fake smile, which she had worn all day like a mask, began to crack. One woman in the front row whispered to her husband, "I can't believe she did that to her own sister." Another guest said, "And we thought she was just being playful." This was cruel. Sana's eyes moved quickly from face to face, searching for someone, anyone, to back her up. But all she saw were frowns, folded arms, and turned heads. People who had once smiled with her were now whispering about her. Her charm was gone, and her secrets were no longer hidden. Gia, still standing beside Leo, felt something shift. For years, she had been told to keep the peace, don't overreact, and Sana didn't mean it. But now, finally, people saw it for what it was. Not just teasing, not just jealousy. It was mean, selfish, and wrong. And now, everyone knew. A few women from Gia's side of the family slowly stood up and walked toward her. One hugged her tightly, saying, "You didn't deserve any of that, Gia. We're so proud of you." Another wiped her eyes and said, "It's your day, and you are glowing." Leo squeezed her hand and smiled. "You're not alone anymore." Sana tried to speak, tried to laugh it off like a joke. "Come on, it wasn't that deep," she said weakly, forcing another smile. But no one laughed. The attention was no longer on her dress, or her heels, or her makeup. It was now on the truth, and the truth had made her small. Even their mother, who had always defended Sana, looked uncomfortable. She avoided her daughter's eyes and quietly held Gia's hand. For the first time, even she didn't try to make excuses. Sana's fake smile twitched and faded completely. She looked around the hall, but it was clear. This was no longer her stage. Gia's back straightened. She didn't have to say anything. Her calm, her grace, and her truth were louder than any words. People saw her now, not as the quiet, understanding sister, but as the strong woman who had endured and still chose love. Sana stood frozen, watching as more and more people surrounded Gia, taking photos with her, hugging her, clapping softly for her strength. The love in the room had shifted, and she wasn't the center anymore. Gia was. And this time, no one was going to dim her light. Just when everyone thought the drama was over, and the wedding could finally continue, something surprising happened. A staff member quietly walked up to Gia with an envelope in hand. "This was just found in the bride's dressing room," he said. Confused, Gia took the letter. Her name was written on it in a handwriting she hadn't seen in years, her late grandmother's. Gia's hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope. The guests grew quiet again, watching her carefully. She pulled out the letter and started reading. Her eyes widened, and her lips parted slightly in shock. Then, tears filled her eyes. But this time, they were not from sadness or pain. They were warm, emotional tears of love and truth. She read the letter out loud so everyone could hear. "My dearest Gia," the letter began. "If you're reading this, then it's your wedding day, and I'm watching from above with so much pride." The room became still. Gia's voice shook a little as she continued. "You were never second, not to anyone, not to your sister, not to your family. You are the light of my life, and I saw your kind heart even when others didn't." Gasps were heard from the crowd. People glanced at each other, stunned. Sana looked shocked and pale. Gia went on reading. "I've left you everything, my darling. The house, the land, the savings. It's all yours. I knew they would try to make you feel small, but you were always meant to shine bright. Don't let anyone, not even your own family, dim your fire." At this point, Gia couldn't hold back the tears. Her hands covered her mouth as she tried to take in what she had just read. Leo gently held her and whispered, "You deserve it all." The guests erupted in quiet cheers and soft clapping. The mood shifted again, but this time it was filled with hope and joy. This was Gia's moment, the moment her worth was confirmed in front of everyone, and not just by her groom or her friends, but by the one person who had always believed in her from the start. Sana, standing a few steps away, looked completely stunned. She blinked rapidly, trying to understand what just happened, but it was clear. The truth had spoken, loud and clear, and it didn't come from revenge. It came from love. Gia stood tall, her grandmother's words wrapped around her heart like a warm hug. She wasn't just the bride anymore. She was a woman finally seen, finally valued, and finally ready to step into a life that was truly hers. Gia looked around the room. Her heart was full of emotions, pain, love, strength, but mostly she felt ready. She slowly stepped forward, picked up the microphone, and took a deep breath. The whole room went silent again. All eyes were on her. Even Sana froze, waiting to see what she would say. Gia stood tall, her voice calm but powerful. "For years," she began, "I let others tell me who I was. I was told to stay quiet, to let others shine. I was told to be the bigger person again and again." Her eyes found her mother in the crowd, then Sana. "And I did. I stayed silent. I gave chances. I kept the peace, but not today. The crowd listened closely. Gia's words were touching hearts, and her strength could be felt in every corner of the hall. Today, she said clearly, I choose myself. I choose joy. I choose truth. I'm no longer the girl who hides in the background. I'm the woman who knows her worth. Then she looked at Sana, but her voice stayed calm and kind. I forgive you, Gia said softly. Not because you said sorry, not because you deserve it, but because I don't want to carry your bitterness with me anymore. I'm done letting your actions control how I feel. Gasps went through the crowd again. Some even wiped tears from their eyes. It was a moment of truth and power. Gia then turned to Leo, who stood proudly beside her. He held out his hand. Without hesitation, she took it. Together, they walked slowly toward the altar. This time, there were no whispers, no side glances, no fake smiles. Every single eye in the room was on her, but not because of drama or gossip. They looked at her with respect, with admiration, with pride. The girl who was always told to stay quiet had finally spoken. The woman who was always pushed aside had now taken center stage. And as she and Leo stood at the altar, ready to begin their new life together, it wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was a new beginning. Gia had rewritten her story, not with revenge, not with anger, but with grace, strength, and love. She didn't need to fight for the spotlight. She had become the light, and everyone saw it. The wedding was over, but something unexpected happened the very next day. Someone at the wedding had recorded everything. Sana's dramatic entrance in a white sparkly dress, her rude whisper to Gia, the shocking microphone moment, the letter from Gia's late grandmother, and most importantly, Gia's powerful speech. They put all the clips together and shared it online. At first, just a few people watched it, then more, and within hours it exploded. The video went viral overnight. People all around the world were watching and sharing Gia's story. In every comment section, women were saying, "This is me. I feel seen. She said everything I wish I could say." Gia, the quiet bride who was always told to step back and let her sister shine, had now become a symbol of strength, truth, and self-worth. News pages picked up the story. Bloggers and influencers talked about it. Even celebrities reposted the clip. People weren't just watching the video. They were feeling it. They were inspired by how Gia stayed calm, how she stood up for herself with grace, and how she took back her power without shouting or revenge. Fashion brands reached out to her. They said, "You are real beauty. You are confidence." They wanted her to model for them, not because she was flashy, but because she was authentic. Invitations came in from women's events and conferences. "Come speak to our girls," they said. "Come share your story." She was finally being heard. All her life, Gia had been treated like she was second best, like her feelings didn't matter. But now the world saw her differently, not as someone's sister, not as a quiet bride, but as a strong, graceful woman who stood her ground and changed her own story. She was no longer overlooked. She had become unforgettable.